Okie dokie. Hello. So yes, we will continue our conversation on meditations of the tarot, on the tarot, with Arcanum 11, which is Force. Cody and I had Britannia's coming in. Cody and I had a good introductory little conversation around fire. And I mean, maybe that'd be a good place to start as we also talk about like what our overall impressions of the chapter is. So, I mean, I felt my overall impression was a better one, even though there were a lot of questions about it, about each part of the chapter. And it was very dogmatic, but I did think it had a lot to do with, fire and how divine energy can be transmuted in that, or transferred through force, in this kind of direct way. But we'll get into the specifics of it. Cody, what was your overall impression of the chapter?
I really liked it. I like it kind of gives me permission to, I feel like, be less driven in like a egotistical sort of way and more driven in like a receptive and like channeling sort of way. I definitely take issue with some of the like very Christian ideologies. Like for the first time, I mean, well, not for the first time, of course I've had taken issue, but I really am like getting kind of sick of it. Getting kind of sick of his like this Catholic Christianity is the best way. But we'll talk about that. Because it's pretty heavy-handed in this chapter for sure.
For sure.
And he even mentions other traditions and how like this like hierarchy of traditions.
I know.
Whatever.
It's like
he spent so much time. It was exhausting, and it took up like a third of the chapter.
Yeah. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not in those.
And it sounded very like judgmental too. He's like less than, more than, and I was like, okay, I don't think Force feels that way.
To me it's like it's all force, and we'll get into this too. Like it's all, everything is coming from the same source. I see like the serpent energy of electricity and the virgin energy of virgin nature, unfallen nature, is the same. It's the same thing. It's just how it's used. That's my take, and that's what I really like, how he kind of separates those out, because I think it is like it's a matter of like how that same energy is diverted or used. I don't think he sees it that way. I think he sees them as two very different energies from different sources. But I think
he even says there's like two directions.
And I think he betrays his own ideals with that, because I think he's trying to set this like God versus, and it's like this whole thing of like this dichotomy and like setting one thing against each other, which betrays his whole ideal of like of universal love and just like kind of acceptance, but but that's still in there, so it's like it still shines through. So it's interesting. It's like and then I also really I don't know if you saw the email I sent with the lust card of the Thoth deck. I think that's a really interesting inversion. And so I hope we could talk about that a little bit, of the card.
Maybe I'll display it at some point for those in the audience, those viewing at home, if anyone actually is.
Like and subscribe at the bottom.
No. Britannia, what were your overall impressions of the chapter?
I agree with like everything Cody said about like the heavy-handedness, and just like the way he split the force between like animality and bestiality, and it's really interesting too, like the way he uses like when he was talking about how like you can't make something from nothing. I thought that was like an interesting topic to bring up because I was like, oh, that's like way more interesting than this like heavy-handed, kind of preachy stuff that he was saying before, where he's really trying to like, I don't know, it was his approach is always really like I know this for the beginning of every chapter, the first like 5 or 10 pages, I'm gonna be like, it takes me about like 3 to 5 pages to get on board. So I think that it like proposes some ideas that I don't necessarily agree with, like you guys said, the splitting of the energy. But I do like where he takes it, kind of skimmed forward a little bit too, but I don't know. I feel like what was it the juxtaposition between like the calm water and the like flowing water. I liked that, but I also didn't like it because I was like, I get what he's saying, like metaphor wise, but I felt like flowing water also has like its benefits. Like and flowing energy is like what he's talking about. So I felt like there was this correlation there that he was kind of missing. Yeah. Overall, it was good. But I almost finished it.
I like how you brought up energy there, right? Like the flowing of the channels. More direct.
Yeah, I think that like what he's trying to say is like the acknowledgement of that energy, like and acknowledging that you're kind of like bound by this endless force, you know, and that you should be like leaning into like the service of that. I like that. But I think that like where he like juxtaposes like the bestiality of like or the hedonism of like the nature of the world. I feel like the world is meant to be as above, so below. So I don't feel like there's necessarily like good or bad. I feel like it's all one thing instead of splitting it into two. So I guess that's where I always like come back to this like quandary.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, well, let's get into it, the nitty gritty. So let's see. Okay, where do we want to start? So we didn't really start with imagery as much this time. I think it was.
He kind of jumps right in on like the virgin nature versus fallen nature
So
thing.
let's talk about like, because I feel like I'm still confused about what he meant by virgin nature. Like, I think he said it so many, I feel like it was one of those things that was repeated throughout the chapter in like ways on how virgin nature, like it should be like as a solution, but not really ever defining like what that is, other than like the Virgin Mary appearing in like people channeling the Virgin Mary, or like this is where the like those were very specific times that like, oh, the Virgin Mary showed up in these places at this time, and it looked because she brought love and devotion, but it didn't really talk about like what this force is. Like I still feel very unclear about that.
He does have some words like cooperation and fusion.
Coherent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And kind of this whole idea of how nature, it's like seeing nature as a cooperative thing rather than a competitive. There's that.
So the competitive's more serpent is what he's saying, and the
Yeah, like
more.
it's because it's friction. Because the serpent is like, he talks about friction generating electricity, right? Like the electricity is the serpent in his view. So it's this friction generating electricity that causes. So it's like this energy of like fighting versus energy of like cooperation, of like receptivity and just like just being a channel for the divine, like impregnated with just power without needing to do anything.
Okay, and that's interesting because I feel like in personal experience, like my biggest kind of leaps in some of my thought have been from like serpent energy. Like when there has been times that have like needed to like a spark has occurred in some like shit thing has happened, or like, you know, some change needed to occur, like would be that, according to that definition, which I think he would agree with, it would be because of serpent energy. And that's like, what action did I take after that is like what I did with it. So I think that's interesting in terms of like an enlightenment story, to call that all something that we should be avoiding, because I think oftentimes you need that friction in order to create any type of change.
Yeah.
Well, what there was something about, it was talking about the serpent energy, in the way, oh my gosh, where was it? Hold on. There was something I had to that.
Well, I would think that, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry.
I would think that he would maybe answer that as like, maybe that, I mean, I think I would ask like, what really is that change that's occurring? Is it something that is really good for like this whole cooperative experience, or is it good for you as an individual? You know,
Okay.
it's like I think that's a big difference, is like the electricity is like ego, like forcing itself into the world, and like it's an energy of domination and control, and rather than cooperation and like fusion and community.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna bring it exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
So I think sometimes we need the friction, the like serpent energy, to like recognize, like to like, whoa, that was shitty. Let's cooperate, you know, that kind of thing. But
okay.
that's my take.
And like the interpretation of it as fallen, I think it means like, you know, you kind of want to be in that flow state. And then when you fall out of the flow state, I feel like that's where it's kind of like fallen energy, where it's like you're still energy, but you're not in communion with like the rest of it in the way where that's like harmonizing. You're kind of fighting against it.
Okay.
And I feel like we've all had times in our life like that where like, you know that you should do one thing, but you really want to do that other thing. And then you do that other thing, and then you're like, oh, I was right. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. So do you think that flow state is always a divine kind of state, like this sense of unfallen nature?
Yeah.
Or do you think the flow state could also be the serpent?
I think it's both.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. It's just how you use it. Like, that's very interesting. Because you could be super in flow and be like, you know, exploiting thousands of workers, you know, or something. I mean, and again, it might not be something that you see as like deterring your path, you know, or like not what you should be doing. Maybe. I mean, I don't know, because I've never been in that position. Like, do people in those positions, like, I mean, this is just, and then maybe this is my, you know, college days of rage against the system or whatever, but like, you know, it's interesting to see that, you know, like people being held accountable for these mass type of institutions. Or are they, you know, or what does that look like up there? And I mean, that's one of the like, what God states, right? Of like, is it a blissful unawareness? Is it a, you know, a flow, you know, I mean, they're in flow, I would say, because it's successful. I mean, I guess maybe other parts of their life wouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, they like, I always get like a little like, I don't know, when people compare something to like communism or Nazism, I'm always like, oh, okay, where are they going with this? Because that's like really like heavy term to throw around, but like it really does kind of like, I guess it's like the best, I guess, example of what that like negative serpent flow state would look like. Like the people around, all those people got swept up in this idea, and then all of a sudden, like people's lives are in danger, and people that would never do these horrible things are doing these horrible things. And when they go to defend themselves, they say, I was just doing what I was told. That's like an energy flow. but like a very negative one. And it's, you know, you see how like there's like that serpent like forcing its will into the world and kind of pulling people along and gravitating in a weird way, but it's not positive. I mean, just think how cool a movement could be if it got that big and it was something positive. Could you imagine if everyone was just
Yeah.
like equal rights? You know, the whole world would just like said yes, equal rights, and just like made everyone be accountable for like having equal rights for everyone. You know, like I think that all the time. I'm like, man, how do these people get so much momentum? You know, but this book really like helped me like I guess define that in like a spiritual way because I always want to understand the energy of like how this could be happening, like how these things happen, like such horrendous things that you know the world has shown that it's capable of, and it's I've always wondered why as like a little kid all the way until this book.
Yeah.
We'll go into that. How do you think,
Yeah.
right? I mean, what's that equation? Like,
I think it just shows that there's a flow state that's like a negative one. And I always like when Cody first asked that question, like you always want to be like, oh, the flow state is so pure and that's what it is. But you're like, no, once you've seen enough of the world and like you've read enough and you know, educated yourself enough, like you know that that's not the case.
I
Like,
mean, I think,
I don't know. Sorry.
oh no, it's okay. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're fine.
I mean, I also think like charismatic leaders are like a big part of that equation, right? Because I mean, you could say like, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. was like a you know, positive flow state of someone with like, you know, I mean, you have these like people who kind of like create that like spark or whatever, and then like the flow is created from there. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting today how our sparks are being dispersed in so many different avenues that it's hard to like consolidate them into one thing. I mean, that's kind of what Cody and I were talking about before we started recording, was like, where do we put all of this fire energy that you're like gathering up, you know? Like, I mean, I think a big part of the equation for these things is like how you are able to like channel and direct that flow of energy and know what like avenues you're putting it into specifically, and then have more and more people get on top of that, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
attention and awareness are huge.
it'd be like charismatic leader, like convenience, and like accessible wills, you know, like a common theme, like somebody to lead it, like accessible for people to actually do themselves, you know?
What I find is illustrative is just what kind of energy really is being generated by like a person like Hitler, you know, or Trump for that matter. I mean, I'm going to compare Hitler and Trump because I think they're very comparable. They are. I've been reading a book about Hitler. It's crazy. But like the energy that's generated is like fear. It's like they're generating everything out of fear. It's like they create this enemy. In Trump's case, it's the, you know, liberal elite, you know, and that like this enemy is doing horrible things. And we have to fight that, you know, and like everything is about fear. And in Hitler's case, like obvious, like fear of all kinds of stuff, and that generates so much power. It's like people, that righteousness against an enemy, a common enemy, is like so powerful, and it's like
I think
so
that's the
electric,
key.
and that's what's generating. And it's like, and it's generating from this source that's just entirely human, that just wants power, you know. It's just it's a power and control rather than just generating from like, and that's where I see like, it's like his idea of like fallen nature. It's like, I think nature is like just the world, just the like energy of like the natural world is like all we need for like to be energized and alive, you know, and like and motivated, not out of fear, but out of like beauty, you know, just the beauty of the world. So that's, I think to me, those are huge differences. in like how energy is used and transmitted. It's like it's out of like, because fear is what kind of generates this like
Urgency.
it generates like urgency and like I need to plan for my retirement, so I need to buy a house and I need to like save and hoard resources. And like for me, because me and my family and like all these other people are doing the same thing, so I got to get mine, like all this stuff that generates like all kinds of suffering for yourself and for other people, and this idea of like got to control my life because like you never know, it might be,
What I
gotta
mean,
like fight against this onslaught of death constantly. So
yeah.
that's like the serpent energy of death and electricity, that's the friction.
I mean, I think it's so interesting today too, because I do think we are bombarded by so many messages, and there are a lot of like unclear like messages being like propelled due to what demographic or where area you're in, so it's just very interesting to like have, I mean, I guess capitalism has the overall under like you need to hoard what's yours in order to like save for your future. Like I would say that's a very like capitalist mindset, right? I mean, I don't know, that's like our overall blanketing society has that, but then you even look at like divide and conquer for the sides, I mean, yes, you do have someone who's power hungry and propelling hate messaging, and you have the equal, and I mean, I would say an equal and opposite on the other side, except it doesn't have a specific unified like power force, so I mean, it's like dispersed amongst like a wealthy class of people that like wants to exclude certain people, and this is like the war of the gods, Trump's like, get me in your circle, and they're like, you're not in our circle, we're gonna shit all over you, it's like this whole fucking thing that, I'm sorry, excuse me, this whole thing that we're all wrapped into, according to the messaging that is wanting to be projected depending on where and who you are. So I mean, that's the whole like, because our individual messaging is getting so dispersed, or our individual power is cut in so many different directions, it's like you end up not doing anything as like a collective, like people who are being governed, which again, it's like, I don't know if that's just the way of society in some regards. Like, is this seems to be the way that it's always been in different societies, is like, depending on what class you're in is what type of voice you'll have and how you'll be treated according to that thing. But I mean, I would love to see that cycle, that those type of things end and have like respect on all levels, understanding that yes, there are different stages that you can be in, but at the same time, your voice isn't going to be like diminished, or like you're not going to be bombarded and confused and used for your energy as a freaking battery for all of this shitty stuff,
Yeah. And this author is like, he goes into, I think pretty soon in the chapter, he goes into like being against polemic, like polemics, like.
Oh yeah.
That's like, that's
What?
huge to it. So it's like this, I think his whole thing would be to like remove yourself from this polemics of society, of the world.
That's either or
like,
thinking,
because
right?
you can't serve, and he says you can't serve two masters, right? You can't serve more than one master, so you might as well serve God in his view, like whatever that is, which I still don't know metaphysically how he would define God.
Yeah, he hasn't really done that yet, huh? Has he defined God yet?
I mean, I think in various ways he has,
Yeah.
but
I feel
the
like he's like
living
layered it
God, the
up.
like loving God, yeah. I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea is to serve, and for me, it's like serve nature, like, and that's and he even goes into that, like being against like substituting God, nature for God, but I see all of nature as like the cooperative nature, the nature of regeneration, and it's like I see God as immanent, rather than like exterior, it's like an emanation, and all this like serpent energy is part of God too, but it's just how it's transmitted. And we're given this kind of playground of separation, right and wrong. So like how do we play with that? That's, to me, that's how that's the metaphysics that I kind of ascribe by. But
Well, and like, so, I mean, maybe this is a good question to bring up to the group too. Do we think that all paths, like if you dive into them in that way, lead to like enlightenments? I mean, I guess this isn't a question of like, what do you think enlightenment is? But something that I heard is like all paths lead back to the source, you know what I mean? So like, would you say that like dark black magic leads to source energy once you get spiraled down far enough? Is that just another metaphor for death, or is that like a actual, like, you can, because I mean, I always pictured it as like enlightenment states can be reached on all paths, like on left hand, right hand, middle path ways. I mean, that's something that's been said over and over to me in magic. He would definitely disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think on every fundamental way of the term, which is very right path thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And left path would probably be like, there's no such thing or something. I don't even know. I've never even like really seen what that path fully is played out. I mean, I know there's some groups in India who have that. Maybe Cody, you have a better idea of what that looks like.
Oh yeah. I took a Hindu Tantra class, so I have a pretty well, it was a long time ago, but I have a pretty good sense of left-hand paths. But yeah, like it's like using the substances, not even necessarily actually using them, but maybe like metaphorically using them even, or like diving into and that's a lot, like tantric Buddhism is that a lot, like just diving into, you're not actually like having sex. It's not like tantric, like having sex. It's like, tantra is bigger than that, but it is like the left-handed path of like really being in the world, like really just like feeling your feelings and like knowing, like acknowledging everything that passes through, and like, and not being against it, but like letting it flow and letting it, and seeing how the energy generates through the use. And in the extreme sense is like the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll, like that getting like the ecstasy through those things, but like you're still, I see it, and this is like, it brings up, actually, I think that lust card is exactly that. It's like generating energy through the goddess Babylon rather than
Should I share it?
It's like, it's a depiction of I see it as a depiction of Babylon, and not the virgin, which is, so yeah, the force card is the virgin, like holding the lion's mouth open, and like the Babylon is like on the lion, like, or chimera, or the sphinx or whatever, and just like ecstatic with it, like just in the world, like fully, and like fully embracing and I see that as just like as an embracing of the divine, of the singular divine. And I that's what I always got from like my tantra classes as well, is like this idea of like diving in to the whole mess of it, in order to get the whole, to be in the whole picture, rather than like this idea of like transcending or like connecting to this God that's somehow external.
That's very interesting.
It's usually a monist viewpoint, like rather than dualist too. Like he's so dualist, like this author, and that's I think what's really frustrating to me is like, and I almost would think that he might disagree with that sometimes when I'm reading him, but then he like betrays that so often. These like serpent energy versus virgin energy, all these dichotomies,
and
which help in the world, because we live in this world of like yes, no, like dichotomies. So it's like it can be helpful to navigate things in this playground, but like in the whole picture, yeah.
Like, I mean, the Christian education called like would call Tantra like, and like, yeah, Buddhism as a dualist system, and would call Christianity as a monist system because of God. So I think that just the messaging is also like different compared to like, or just depending on how you're, but I agree with you is like what, because it's always been God and Satan. So I'm like, there are like two, so this is like a, you know, not a monolithic whatever state, because you have more than one God kind of. I mean, honestly, like I don't, but I mean, that's, but
they're not trying to make them equal though. I don't think that like God and Satan would be considered equal. Like adversaries, yes. Equal, I wouldn't say that they are. I think that's his point with like the serpent versus like the virgin energy is like it's not like one's better or worse, but they're not equal. Like one is just like an offshoot of the other. Like he was saying that the serpent is like reactionary energy. So it's like a reaction to the flow instead of just being in it. And so that's where like that friction comes from. But that's always interesting because, you know, when you find yourself like doubting yourself, you start to like fall in life, you know? And when you start to just like get into life and just like put in the hard work, you don't even look up and notice that you're like on the right path in the flow state. It just feels so much better. I don't know. Like, that's how I feel traveling. Like sometimes like feel stagnant when you come back to your house. You're like, oh, I'm back to it. But when you like are out somewhere new in nature and like connecting with yourself and connecting with like that just like pure joy of being, there's something different about that joy that you get from doing that versus like going to the local bar for your drink after work, you know?
Yeah.
When you're literally creating new neural pathways in your brain, like it's something you haven't experienced, as places you haven't been before, so you are like more alive because I mean you're experiencing more parts of, you're creating new channels in your brain, you know, of new experiences that you're having, new memories. And
That's interesting. That is kind of like virgin birth in a sense.
Honestly, every time I travel, I feel like a new person when I come back, like a completely different person. Like I feel like I grew so much in such a small amount of time that when I come back, I have to like try to shoehorn myself back into this old life where I'm like, oh shit, like I gotta figure out how to like make my life more of like it's kind of like expanding and needing more space, and so you have to like carve out those spaces in your life when you come back to like make room for the new version of yourself, you know, like the things you want to do, places you want to go, the kind of people you want around you, you know, like I think dialing in on that like pure energy or whatever that means for you really does like align you to like move farther faster in like a more like holistic way or cathartic way where it almost feels like a building up of energy and like a release of energy. It's almost just like that happiness that makes you want to cry versus like that sadness that makes you want to cry. I don't know.
Versus that dullness that's like dulls all emotion.
Yeah,
That's more what I get.
I mean, I
Dead.
think there's a balance between that. Like, I mean, this is very middle path of me to say, but it's like, how can, I mean, just like for magic, I mean, for like, I think grounding practices in, you know, in any spiritual, you know, spiritual path is so important because it like has a point of reference. So like, you know, where to like come back to. I mean, that's just like in terms of like the spin out that I've seen in some like spiritual things, which I've talked to you both about, you know, it's like, I'm so grateful for like knowing where my center is inside myself so that I know astrally how far to come back. And I think that's also like important when it comes to like, I don't know, vacation. Cause I mean, at least that's what like, cause I had those experiences. I mean, that's been my experience of like traveling and wanting to just continue traveling. And like, I had no, like, I found myself just like flailing out into like the ether and not like having any point of reference of what I was doing or who I was or where I was going at all, because it was just like flayed out, you know, which was important to feel. But I don't know about, I mean, for me sustaining it, but I'm like one step away from van life at any second, you know, for those reasons. But I knew like trying it, it wasn't like something that like worked for me in that way, which I would argue probably doesn't work for most people in this because of those reasons. Like,
yeah, there's a certain there can be a certain like not directed sort of like just loosey goosey energy that doesn't do anything, that just kind of fizzles into space. And some of that, my experience, travel and sometimes.
Yeah. And maybe that's because like that's what, like you said, the hesitation to do fire ritual right now, it's like for those reasons. Like I feel like this is personal, I guess, but like I've flailed out so much of that energy and not actually done a lot, channeled that into something that's like doing something in, I have, but in different ways, like I want to do more directed things now. But yeah, making that step is just like, oh man, this is different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think like we can live our lives directed, and it's like it's just how it's like, yeah, how we it's just being careful with what it's for me it's just a matter of, and I don't think he even gets into that much, a matter of like doing out of love and beauty versus fear and control, like trying to control your life in a way that's like damaging to others or even yourself, like out of fear. To me that's like, those are the dichotomies that make a lot more simple and like kind of platitudes, but I think are common
love, right?
common new age platitudes, I guess, but but they make sense to me, and especially, and given this chapter, they make sense to me a lot. But I'm actually really curious again, like I want to kind of bring it back to that virgin versus Babylon thing. Like what do you guys think of that? Like like the virgin versus the prostitute kind of energy. What do they represent to you? Like what?
You want me to say it? I'll say
Yes.
I don't believe that Mary was a virgin, and if
Yeah,
anything, her and the prostitute are the same, and that's why I like think that it's all the same. It's all one source.
yeah,
Babies come from prostitutes and they come from virgins. They
yeah,
come from both, and that energy is both. Like I don't even, okay, so what do they define as a prostitute in the sense of like, what are her motives? Are her motives for money, survival? Like, is that the metaphor? Because for me, it's like they try to like reference her hedonism versus like the purity of this other person, but they don't really define what her purity is.
yeah.
I think
Like she represents just God's like direct like presence in earth, like as his oven. I don't know, you know what I mean?
so that was his bit on Revelations, which I actually really like enjoyed that part.
Because it's
Where
interesting. Revelation.
what was that?
Oh, I said it was really interesting how he went into Revelation.
Yeah, right. I think that was where she was like the gatekeeper of like the like of what, the Antichrist or something. Like it was like she was the one to like deliver all of the like conditions to take place before the Antichrist could come in and like have dominion over this realm. So I think according to this, it would be like the facilitator of like pure serpent energy. It would be like the conditions to be met in order for like Mother Earth to be in more of a Babylon state.
Okay, I can see that.
That's how I interpreted it, at least. It was more like this figure that like was above the gate and kind of like slewing out things in order for the gates to be opened for the Antichrist to come in.
I thought it was interesting how like when Jesus was resurrected, he like appears to her. Of like all the people.
To who?
Like I don't know, to Mary.
To Mary, right?
Not the Virgin. Not the Virgin Mary. He came to
Mary.
Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weren't they married? Like
right.
I think Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. That's probably super blasphemous.
Yeah, I thought I've heard about that, but I don't know.
I don't know if that's like a rumor.
Yeah, I don't know what the factual basis of that is.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. He came to marry, you know, but that,
Yeah.
I thought that, because I thought that that represented like redemption and like love, you know,
Yeah.
because I thought that was his wife. Like, I thought he made her his wife, and then that was like where that came from. But
Yeah,
Well,
like,
that's yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say is that like, what is that symbolism like? Is that like the ultimate forgiveness, the ultimate love, or like the turning over of like serpent energy into like pure energy? Like there's a transmutation there, or you know what I mean? Like what does that represent?
yeah.
I mean, I would call it a transmutation from just what I like know about it, but I obviously don't know enough about that. Um, and I view
I always
mother
found
as
her.
more of a state of condition, so it can be either both facilitate life. It's just what type of like life are you leading? You know, how are you using the energy with the conditions that are met? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's just a matter, like, even like that like Babylon energy. I don't want to even say prostitute. It's a weird metaphor for me. Like, I don't really, I
Yeah,
guess
I don't like it either.
I could see like it being like, the holy prostitute, like the temple prostitute, the priestess prostitutes of like the old mystery, the old like whatever, where were they in Greece? I don't remember where I've heard about that, but like temple prostitutes where they have like this role of being. Oh, there is like the um uh what is it? The goddess Athena? Is it Athena? Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, like these
That.
where they, yeah, and it is like this left-handed path. So you can like, it's like how you use your lust to like be to like find the unity of the divinity in nature, in the world. It's like, or you can just like be like completely caught up in your lust and your fear and just like not have any like, just be kind of chaotic with it, like serving many masters kind of thing, like just like the hedonism of the nihilist that just doesn't care, that like it doesn't do any, like it's just kind of pointless, and it's ultimately like pretty destructive, and there's no spiritual. So there's ways of like interacting with Babylon in that, in like various ways, as there is with like the so-called virgin, with where like, yeah, just like forest bathing, or something, versus which like, and in a sense, like there's not a lot you can do wrong interacting with that virgin, like virgin nature kind of
I
idea.
mean, if you,
But you can with Babylon, and I think that's what.
Well, I think one's like wholesome and one's like charged with like
Yeah.
an intention or a want or a desire. Where I think that's what like creates that like serpent friction is like there's that desire there to like have a direction within that flow instead of like just kind of going with what naturally is supposed to happen. You're trying to like force your will upon the flow or the force. And I kind of really the whole chapter or like from what I read of it, I kept going back to like the Jedi and like use the force and that whole like metaphor and like the whole like Yoda version of things, or like there's like different ways of using the force. So it's like Mandalorian style, there's Jedi style, there's like different, quote unquote positive ways or pure ways to use the force. And then you see like Sith Lords and,
Yeah.
other people, you see Anakin to like start going that way. And you can kind of see the way energy in the force is like used. Like, I don't know, I love that metaphor of how it's like an invisible force that they like channel and then they like make this whole hierarchy of like, I don't know, it was such a good metaphor for kids to understand like the metaphysics of the force, quote unquote. Like
what I
good
mean,
and evil is not so simple.
Yeah.
in that way, like the council, the Jedi Council, like almost create Anakin in certain sense of the term, right? By what Anakin views as limiting his power. So like really you can, and that's kind of what I wanted to mention as well, was like, virginal energy can be very like how do you say sticking to one thing, like homeo something, you know what I mean? Homeostatic, right? Like you can, and I mean, by like creating a state to where you don't have any new experiences or you don't experience anything outside of what you already know. Like and because of like, but that's also a fear driven thing, you know? So it goes back to that fear of the unknown type of thing. But I do think a lot of like purest states inspire a lot of the most fear states, right? So I guess that wouldn't be like of virgin nature particularly, but at the same time, it can be a byproduct of a lot of these like states, you know. But again, it was a necessary equation in Star Wars, and like I do think it's still like a necessary equation in like challenging yourself to like expand yourself from just the circle that you know. I don't know if that was making, again, I don't know where that lands in terms of like, maybe that's not true virginal energy, but that's just where my mind thought when it went there, you know?
No, I hear you. I think that's pretty good analysis. I mean, we're in this crucible of we're in the crucible of the world. You know, we're in the playground of the world. I like that better. Playground. Where we have all the possibilities, and it's just like figuring it out. And I mean, I like more and more lately, I've come with meditation and stuff, I'm coming to like much more this like Buddhist sense of like all these words are delusional. Like there is no monism, there is no dualism. It's just like that's all just like a bunch of frivolity that we're making up. Like it's nothing. It's none of this. Like that's kind of like that's what's been inspiring me. It's like there's something underlying it that's like indescribable. Like, and I even like the old, like a lot of these like Sufi or like Islamic views of God, that like God can't be described. That's like, it's a very old like Islamic theology philosophy where like using any kind of any descriptors of God is not, can't be right. Like you can't, and even saying God can't be described, even like ascribing that quality to God is wrong in some sense. Like, so it's like there's this like, and that comes then to like the ideal of silence, like silence. So
I like that definition of silence.
Yeah.
So he talked about it a little in this chapter, and it irked me because it wasn't what I like ascribe it, like silence, you know? I mean, yeah. I like it as like the unnamed God, you know, like that's also like, you know, how would I even know how to describe God? Because it's like, I'm a part of that. It's like, I can't even see.
It's just kind of you could say it's like the whole field of everything that's like doesn't, and it's the emptiness is like does seem to be the best descriptor of it. Like this empty for me, like there's this like place of just like, there's that no thought, that place of just like the gap between thoughts, you know, that's like the gap, it's like the space between creation, of all the creation, you know, that's timeless, that doesn't have qualities, nothing can be seen there. It's like the space and it's, in a sense, it's the space in which things can happen, but it itself is just a vast emptiness, you know. There's things happening, and that's like kind of just our own like game, it's the playground, but like underneath that it's just the infinite space of nothing, you know.
That's how I feel. Like, have you ever been to a deprivation tank?
I haven't.
That's like the exact experience you get in a deprivation tank. You would absolutely love it. You have to go.
Yeah. I want to. Maybe I'll ask
I
for
love
that
it.
birthday.
Ooh,
Yeah, they have them on Groupon too.
Yeah.
Happy almost birthday.
But I love it because like you go in there and it creates that awareness of that boundless, timeless, qualityless space, and you can open or close your eyes and it's darkness. And like I just I don't know. There's something about that that's like humbling and inspiring. It like makes you feel small and huge at the same time because really you're only just your thoughts at that point. And then once you unravel your thoughts and you just lay there in this like pool of endless thought, like it's just a space at that point. You stop thinking, and it's like I don't know. Like it's like yeah, that's like where I think sublime, like the word sublime comes from when they're talking about like egotistical sublime is like the sublime or reaching nirvana. Like I imagine that being the space.
Yep. And the author even says like beyond intellect, beyond sense data, like these things and yet like of course he's trying to describe these things with words. So again, he's writing a book, so he's like in writing the book he's kind of betraying his ideology a little bit. Sometimes that irks me in this book, but it's just it's a journey. It's fun. But
I mean, so I like that you brought in sublime because he does talk about like, I think on page 282, he was going into the emerald tablet and how, or emerald table, and overcoming every subtle thing doth penetrate every solid substance, right? And the first part of overcoming every subtle thing was going into like what are the subtle things that you need to overcome. So it was like, overcoming is to change enemy into a friend, which I really liked that just in some of the interactions that I've been having lately. But after that was talking about doubt, enjoyment, and power. I didn't understand the doubt, so we could talk about that. But the power or the enjoyment is what, when Britannia, you were talking about that sublime state, like he goes into like a hierarchical state of those joy, bliss, what is it like? Yeah, joy, pleasure, joy, bliss, and beatitude.
yeah.
Yeah, I like
that's pretty important to this whole thing.
I think that's where like where he comes back to like the like recognizing of the beauty and the positivity and like those things that inspire us or those things that draw us forward, that they don't take energy away from you as you're giving to it, that it's almost giving you energy to give to it. I don't know. Like I started a nonprofit in like the last 2 years and I worked with like a bunch of nonprofits. I still do. And I don't get paid. And I've never thought about that. Like literally I never thought about that. Like, oh, I'm not like being compensated. That never was a thought in my mind. I was always just like not swept away, but just so happy to be there doing that and being a part of it and just making those things happen, like making an idea happen, giving like somebody's dream a chance at coming true, like the Make-A-Wish Foundation for terminally ill adults. It's called the Bucket List Foundation. We do that one. And we literally like make wishes for these people come true. So we like ask them like something that they would never even imagine being able to do. Like you want to fly your family up from Mexico and we'll send you all to Disneyland, like something crazy. Like we'll throw a whole wedding for people, like amazing stuff. And it's really cool to just be a part of that kind of energy, like the kind of people that come together and make those things happen. Like I don't know, it feels like good energy draws in good energy and creates more good energy instead of it being like, I don't know, you can feel when somebody does something for a different reason than just to do it. You can just tell, you ask someone to like pick you up at the airport and you feel like you have to offer them gas money because you feel so awkward about asking them to pick you up, or you know what I mean, like something like that where you're like there's a little friction there. Like I feel like a lot of people have that with their jobs. They don't realize that the energy that they're giving or taking at these places that they're like selling their time for, selling their energy for it, may not be in their best interest. And they don't want to face that because they want to grip onto the material security that they get with that job or that
Well,
lifestyle.
we're in a state to where we can't afford to be frictionless a lot of times, like as a society, I mean, which is annoying.
I feel like the people that are most successful in their fields wouldn't say they do it for the money, or the most like people that are like really happy with their job a lot of the time. Like, I mean, even like psychologists and professors and like all kinds of people that I've interviewed when I was like, going to college and stuff. Like you see that these people truly love what they're doing. They truly love the subject that they're obsessed with. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts where I just like it keeps me alive to hear the passion in other people doing like obscure, random, cool science things like off in the corner somewhere where you never hear about it, but they're so passionate and they're making like these huge leaps in like discovery. And it's so fun to kind of vibe on these random people's podcasts. It just kind of shows you like the nature of like positive thought or that forward flow and that like obsession with like that pure, like wholesome, I want to, make something happen for the world. Like, I don't know, I think it kind of conducts a little bit of that around it and kind of pulls people in just as much negative energy will pull you into like, if you're around a negative person and they start to put you in a bad mood, you know, it's
So
like the same thing, but only with positivity. I feel like there's like that aspect.
would
Yeah.
define that as blissfulness. State of human spirit state of the human being where spirit, soul, and body were united in a comprehensive rhythm. It is the rhythm of the spiritual, psychic, and bodily life brought into harmony.
I like the word harmony for it too.
Yeah, and he goes talks about these two Greek words for life, Zoe and bios, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Zoe is vivification from above, like the divine vivification, and bios is like the horizontal force.
Is that in the first, what, I mean, do you have the book? What page is that? Is that
I
in
don't have
the
the book. That comes like pretty close to where I think you were talking about.
Is it when he's talking about doubt though, or is it more when he's talking about?
Oh, here it's on page, I think, 286, right? Sacred magic has nothing in common with the power that compels, operates currently on life or Zoe, the spiritual, psychic, and physical, and the sorry, it's dark in here, but my light.
Armory, yeah, armory. That's
Yeah.
I highlighted this part because it was that's where it really gets into fire for Archangel
Michael. Swords, yeah, and the Archangel Michael. Like, oh.
Yeah.
I like he calls him the arch strategist. I haven't seen that before. Arch strategist, which is interesting. I'm not sure what to make of that yet, but
it's kind of cheeky.
Yeah.
See, yeah.
Well, and I also like how there's like victims in air quotes.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, this
but
is
like he says, like when electricity dominates bios, it's Babylon. When Zoe dominates bios, so the ideal is Zoe dominating bios, which dominates electricity. So I think that's like what we're getting into with this, like these ideas of how, see, and this what I like in this chapter is he gets it to where like, yeah, electricity is just part of the thing, but it's not, but it's like you just got to let the Zoe like control things rather than like, it's like a top down rather than bottom up view. And then
I like how he
virginity
like
is
brings.
unity of above and below, he says.
I like how he goes into like the two types of dying.
Yeah.
Where the body refuses to serve the instrument for the soul. And then the other is where the witch vivifies and animates the body, retires, and thus is mixed by the body, and then the soul, which quits the body. So I really like that metaphor of like, that's where I think like the word faith actually like makes more sense to me. But it's cool because like one is where like your body will die, but your soul will live on, your faith will live on. But like your faith could betray you. You could be like alive, but like you could be like dead on the inside type thing. Like your body's still working, but like your heart and your soul are like not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like that a lot actually. I had like an obsession with death when I was a kid. So I always was like, what is death? Like I didn't think it was like the end. So it's like interesting to have like that kind of approach to it.
That actually reminds me of the previous book we read, the In Love with the World, where he talks about and that's like a much more nuanced version of like of how death works. Like you could, and how like the reincarnation process would happen, where like as you're dying, your soul is like starts grasping for matter, and then like that's what like ultimately attaches it to like matter again and creates the reincarnation process again, rather than like the way of dying, the ideal Buddhist way of dying, where like you're seeing it happen and you just understand like I don't need to grasp anymore. It's like can
Yeah,
be free.
I've had that near death experience where you're like, oh, just gonna float off now.
Yeah. So it's
It's
actually
really
very, it's like,
peaceful.
yeah.
Never felt more at peace. And then you come back and you're like, oh shit. I'm just kidding. They're
Yeah.
happy too. They're like, oh cool, another chance. It's like it literally reminded me of when I was a kid. Like what I imagined dying like a video game was, where you're like, whoop, you get back up and you're like, keep playing.
Yeah.
Like that was one of my lives.
You should read that book, Britannia, for sure.
I'll borrow it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I'll give it to you.
it's a good one.
It's a really good one. 'Cause the sleep parts of it, I mean, that's because he gets into that in this chapter, like right here, just talks about Kabbalah's, which I mean, that'd be really interesting to research as well, like the modes of sleeping according to Kabbalistic thought, you know. We've learned about a little bit of the bodies with what Lon's book on Lon Milo Duquette's book on chicken Kabbalah, right? Went into a little bit of the like different bodies, and that's I think what Kabbalah like goes into sleep with as well, which should be really interesting to look into. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How many different ways of awakening? I highlighted that.
Yeah. Oh, and you were questioning what the doubt part was?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of tying back to how maybe he's like, I really didn't highlight a lot in that chapter, in that part. So it just kind of made me feel like maybe he's like he might not be super sure about that either. I don't know.
Well, I mean, his doubt is just having a divided mind, right? It's like having like serving two masters, you know, like having two like, and that's what. But I mean, personally, like I struggle with that because I've never was raised with much faith, you know. So like,
yeah,
faith seems really difficult. Like doubt seems like the default state. Like, and I think there's something to be said for the beauty of doubt too. Like, not to be like skeptical of all of it. And I feel like that's a Buddhist way too. Like just
I think that's what our
don't
journey
have
as
faith
humans
in
are,
it.
is to like conquer that though. Because I think with doubt, we separate ourselves from the flow state and from our access to it, because there's a part of us that isn't willing to let go of our individual control of knowing to be able to just be. And so we find ourselves going into those loop patterns where we'll make like the same mistakes like several times in our life and be like, why does this keep happening to me? So you're like, oh wait, I think I know why. And then you're like, oh, I'll change it. And then you kind of like jump off that track and you're like, oh, back in the flow state. And then you'll like do it again. And that's just like our process as humans, like how we grow like internally. I feel like it's interesting. We're kind of like a little coral or like a little succulent where we're like using the same like architecture to like build up or build outward. But we kind of have to like use the same structures because that's just like within our capacity, our realm of like whatever's possible for us, like with whatever dimensions and awareness we have going on with us. I don't know. There's some monks that have they put them in like observations where they've like lived without food or like breathing and all kinds of weird stuff where you're like, that's inhumanly possible, but these dudes literally did it. So, you know, I think it's about like slowing down or like, you know, controlling that state. I don't know. It's so interesting. Like the way this world is
Yeah,
structured, there's no way for us to know how complex it is. So there's a lot that we can't control that I think we spend our time fighting. And that's why people are so exhausted all the time too. They're always, I need caffeine. And they're just like fighting to go up and fighting to go down. And it's like incongruent with the flow.
yep, I understand that well.
For sure.
It's hard. It's like when you're way out of the flow, it's hard to be back in it too, because you're just like so out of whack.
Oh yeah, it's like being in a different time zone and then like going back and you're like, wait, where am I? What time is it? Like,
But it's true, like faith in just the flow, faith in like that, because we know that like I think there's a sense of like that we can't control everything. We can't know everything. We can't have that kind of like doubt is kind of an energy of like trying to control everything in the face of having no control at all, of having
mhm.
like there's
It's a
actually like
reaction, just
forces
like the serpent.
forces way beyond our limited perspective, our limited human perspective that we can't control, yet we try to control it by doubting the you know by doubting everything, by like and faith would just be like, I'm just gonna be like surrender to not being in control. But that's the next chapter. So we'll get ahead I'm getting ahead of ourselves now. The hanged man card. So
Oh, cool. Surrender, and that's
surrender.
nice.
Oof, oof, this one.
Good. That'll be a good one. Or
It
I don't
will.
know. So
equally
far,
challenging, but
Force lined up with fire really well.
yeah.
I think force lined up with fire pretty well. Like, I think it's interesting, like the intrinsic like association with force is like something pushing or propelling or you causing an effect or something like that. But the actual statements that he's making about force are the opposite. That force is already in motion and that you don't need to do anything but jump on board, basically. And I really like that because I think that was something that I've been searching for with like meditation and Buddhism, and I've found that in meditation. And I found that like being that way in life has been so much easier and so much more positive for me. So
Yeah.
that was such a big thing for me when I was like younger to like feel and discover when I was like I'm completely obsessed with like Buddhism and like Eastern philosophy because of certain ways of the letting go and the non-attachment and stuff, because I don't think it's like letting go like not appreciating or not valuing or acknowledging. I think it's like you have the responsibility to acknowledge and let go of it. You don't have like an attachment to it. You're just constantly appreciative. And it's a lot harder to do that. Um, especially in this day and age, but I think it was like such an important practice for people because it really helps with like relationships and people passing away. Like the hardest things you'll lose in your life are like the people you love, whether it's like a relationship ending or them passing away, or you know what I mean? Like I think that's where this kind of stuff is like not only really helpful but becomes like so validating in those times that I just wish we had more of that acknowledgement in the world. But
Yeah.
because it doesn't really like infringe on religion or philosophy. I feel like it just kind of adds to the depth of everyone's lore. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can we all just be friends?
that's
Can we
why
all just agree?
you can get such a deeply dogmatic person that as our unknown author and talk about such universal things and have such a riveting conversation, because like the hermetic knowledge underneath all of that is like truth, I feel. And yeah, the energy, it's how you use the energy, but here's how it's strut or how it's trans how it looks in the world.
Yeah. sometimes I feel like this book is just him trying to really fit Christianity with this like perennial
Yes.
wisdom, you know, like
Thank you for
really
saying
trying to
it.
make Christianity into this great thing that's like better than all the rest. That's like,
Best there ever was.
but it is this like he's so attached to this Christian eschatology, you know, this Christian um like viewpoint of time. And he gets into that in this chapter where he talks about like the Old Testament, like the revel. And I like that. It's kind of fun, like the Yod He Vav He of that, of like the Yod is like God's, you know, God's just presence, will, whatever. The He is like the Ten Commandments, right? That like Moses getting the commandments on the rock. Um, and then the Vav is it's like the transmission of the Judaic peoples, you know, like the tradition, like the transmission and like the keeping it alive, keeping the word of God alive, right? And then the final ha is Jesus coming, and then the promise of his return and resurrection. So like this is like the Christian, and this is like and I struggle with, I think this is like, so it's the Christian view of time is like this, that it has a beginning and an end. This whole idea of like beginning and end. And it begins with the word of God and ends with the return of Jesus, right? And like, so there's this teleology that has like, it's the world is set up for this purpose. And so much of this author's viewpoint is trying to like fit it in with that um view of time, which I think is like
Arbitrary.
it's I think, yeah, it's arbitrary, and it just doesn't, it's not necessarily true. So it's like it's kind of point,
Yeah. I remember
the
like
logic
I
kind of doesn't hold up at that point.
yeah, I mean like
The
I
premises are
remember going to
flawed.
like Sunday school or like, temple with my friends, and I would like ask like kind of a poignant question like that. Like, and they just it's they don't want to discuss. They have this end like knowledge. Like this is it. And there's no discussion. And you're like, but isn't that healthy to have discussion? I'm not questioning whether it's right or wrong or whatever. I just like to discuss this. And like, what do you mean by this? Like, what do you mean that, he's going to come back? Like, what do you mean that, like, the word of God versus like the spirit? Like, what do you mean? Like, like when I would ask those things when I was a kid, I felt like a lot of really religious people would take it as an insult that I was asking questions, but I was actually genuinely curious. I wanted to know. So I felt like all these kids sitting here picking their nose, I'm like actually asking questions because I want to know answers. And like they'd be so jerky to me, I'd end up stop going and I'd go to like different youth groups because I was just like, like
If only you
weird. People
had
get a
this
little
guy as the teacher who you're asking questions. He would answer those questions with pretty interesting answers, actually.
yeah. I mean that might have
He
been
actually
dangerous
does
though to
answer
like give
those questions,
Yeah.
which
yeah,
I
but to
really
give like
appreciate.
an answer that's very pointed and like I feel like it has like a bias or like an ulterior motive to like explaining these philosophies. Like if he explained the card if you could like literally redact all the heavily religious things, I think that it would read in a higher way, and that
Yeah.
like his points would transcend a little farther. And if he put some bumpers on his message by putting, like beginning and end here, you only have this much room in between to talk about. Then
I mean, this is a really cool, I agree with you. I think this is a really cool experiment. Like, it'd be so cool to get like a bunch of different people and traditions together and like have them write letters on what they think each card means, Like, as
Yeah.
as this, I think this.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's cool and like it's fun. I know this is like kind of weird, but you go to like different countries, you talk to like shamans or psychics or like, people kind of in like the alternative thought realm. And it's interesting what kind of symbolism they have like within their own cultures that kind of either transcend different cultures where you have like similar symbols across like the globe or like similar interpretations. which I find interesting. But also like there's some like vast differences. You know, like the backwards swastika is like the sign of peace. And like I think he's even brought that up in this book where,
Mm,
just like the tweaking of like the visual of something like invokes like an energy or a power of like acknowledgement where it seems familiar, but there's something slightly off about it, or like something that, you've seen before, but you don't know where. I don't know. I think there's just like a bunch of symbolism. I was noticing that when I was looking at the ruins. I was down at the Mayan ruins like a few days ago down near Tulum, and you're just like looking at like the symbolism that they've carved into these stones, and it's so powerful to like see what animal energies and like god energies and what kind of things they subscribe energy to. Like the sun and the moon were like huge parts of it. Like if you watch the sunrise or the sunset, it like comes between this hole in the temple at, at like this specific time, and it's so like things like that. Or there's symbolism and gravity to like different things put throughout the world, or like the stars and like the positioning of like pyramids across the world are all like a lot based off constellations, which I think is kind of cool to like think of that energy and like that symbolism to people. Like they're looking up and they want to like connect to something, bigger than them that they can't explain, but they're going to put all this energy and all this time into making these monuments of that feeling of spirituality and connectiveness. I don't know. I love that. I love that so much. I don't
yeah,
like the
and there
slave
can't,
labor that
there,
it costs, but
and it's just like there can't be just one religion being the answer when you have the plethora of religions claiming to be the absolute truth. Like when you look at all of them, it's like you can't. And that's it's like his whole thing. He's so deeply embedded in Catholicism that he can't see out of it. Like, and the three of us are like already outside of it, so we can look at it in and see all the religions and be like, they're all claiming this absolute truth. So how
I
can
hate
this one
anything
be the absolute?
claiming absolutes, though. Yeah, absolutes don't make sense.
Yeah,
If you're talking about something that's beyond explanation, then having an absolute for it is completely diminishing and a slap in the face to like the entire
Creation.
thing
Love
you
creation.
can't even explain it. Like you said with God, you can't say that you can't, or you can't say you can, because there's just no way to like approach that in like a real truth, like
Separating
if you
itself separates you from love, which creates fear and hate,
yeah,
and
yeah,
othering. Like that is like serpent energy is creating like separation,
yeah.
yeah.
and the fall, separation. Like, I don't know.
The
I
fall
mean,
Yeah,
always
it's
kind of reminds me of like the Babel situation too, where like everyone just like couldn't all of a sudden communicate anymore. Like I don't know, I feel like that's like very much the same thing. Like we couldn't commune with like the energies and the angels anymore because we have fallen. We
yeah,
we like, took away our sovereign privileges and make
but
that
again,
phone call anymore.
my stance would be that's important for growth. Like that's what like is a part of like manifest physical human life, is like going through that and like understand and like for no other purpose than to experience it.
No,
yeah.
I agree 100 million%. Especially like dude, this last trip, like I like kept wanting to cry because everything felt so right. And I felt like the earth and like the energy of the place and it was so like you were talking about earlier how you can just get like pure energy and pure bliss from like just being and appreciating. Like I felt like so much overwhelming energy of like appreciation and love and like excitement, genuine excitement and wonder for like the world around me, just because of like getting to travel and go see some jungles and see some beautiful oceans and see some Mayan ruins. Going to a cenote that's like millions and millions and millions of years old, like swimming in 800,000-year-old water.
Yeah.
I love the cenotes down
They're
there.
so beautiful. Like I literally
Uh,
was the last person out, and I was like, I wanted to cry because I just felt like it was so magical. And like the tour guides, I ended up making friends with them. So I'm like friends with them on Facebook. So I'm gonna like go back down, but like looking on their photos on their profiles, I'm like, oh my God, like these these places are like absolutely magical and breathtaking. And like they have like they found like human remains and stuff down there where like dated back to like the indigenous back in the day. And there would be like probably accidents and stuff, like people living in there, like human sacrifices and stuff in those areas. You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting because like that's the only place that you can get fresh water. So this is interesting. This is where it all comes back to the source. So like there's no accessible ground fresh water. There's no like lakes or real like rivers. It's all underground rivers down in that part of the area. So like all the animals and all the people have to go to the cenotes to get water. So if you put a camera at a cenote, you'll see like a jaguar, something come up eventually because that's the only place they can get water. But I love that because it's like a unifying thing, like humans, animals, like the earth, like as in like the flora and the fauna, they all have to get their water from the same place. They're all getting their sustenance and their like rejuvenation from like the same. I don't know. I just love that. I don't it like made me so happy.
Yeah. And I mean, like the beauty of the earth is like why I think it's important for people that do know most of this is, going into some ethos that I live by is to have some directional force to this type of energy because it's more like a responsibility for it to like continue on, like and not be thwarted into something that is going to be exploitative for the future. Like, I don't know if that's like a battle that I'm making up in my head that's maybe not like necessary, but like I do find a lot of like so on page 294, for forces, life and longevity is an important aspect of it. Like more just like keeping tradition and like, but in like a, not even keeping the path, or like knowing that like I'm like moving forward into like a space where I'm co-creating like a more, I don't even want to say sustainable, but like a place where that type of beauty can exist in the world. And like through all the hard as well, like there is equal amounts of beauty. Like I really want to like propel that. And I think that's like I'm excited to understand how to like channel my will in those type of directions. That's what like keeps me going on my quest, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think there's like protection and then there's exploitation. And I think people can like get them mixed up where they're like, oh, I'm protecting this resource by charging money to let people trample it. That's not protecting it. That's you making money off of it. You know what I mean? So I think even with like energy, with like ourselves, protecting ourselves, or protecting the good in the world while also making sure that you're not like exploiting it or like, becoming like how like exercising your will over it.
Yeah, I mean that's like with thank you for saying that because that's like with teachers like and wary of your practices and knowing how you're communicating this. It's all very important. Like where's your space so that you have your own thing that you're moving forward with, especially with any type of energy work. Like if you're guiding people in a space, if you're communing together, like what are you talking about? Like what are you like, do you have like there's no underlying like I'm just really grateful for the space we've created here, but then also like I want to propel that outside of myself, like in more than just those spaces, if you know what I mean, without like a directed will, and be wary of folks that like exert that upon you, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was kind of cool how like so like my family, my best friend's family, like my family, they're pretty Catholic, and one of there's twins that were officiating the wedding. Well, their sister, I've met her a few times. She's super cool, but we were hanging out in the pool because we didn't know where anyone else was, and we kind of had some one-on-one time. And she brought up magic and stuff to me, and we both got to like have this cool bonding talk where we basically like understood each other so deeply that we just feel like so close now.
Oh,
And it was really cool because I wasn't like, hey, do you do this? But she was talking about like specific energies and stuff like that. And I kind of got the vibe that she was like down to understand what,
yeah, that's
what I
so
was.
cool.
Yeah. And I was just talking to her about the book a little bit, and she's like, that's awesome. And she wanted to check it out.
Nice.
I thought that was cool. It was just like a nice organic way of it coming about where I think that's what it takes at first is like people like not being in the shadows about things, but not necessarily being the spotlight either.
Yeah, he talks about
We kind of just have to like be ourselves and like have the conversations come up naturally, I think, and then if people are open to the conversation naturally flowing in that direction, I feel like they'll naturally be like cool with hearing what we have to say and expanding their awareness a little bit, which I think is fun.
Totally agree. Okay, well, yeah, we should wrap up this chapter. Yeah, 2 weeks, we'll talk about the Hanged Man. Any final closing words or quotes? I said my quote, something about longevity.
I was just gonna say one thing about like, just we kind of didn't touch on it, but the 10 Commandments. I thought his
Oh,
take
yeah.
on those were pretty cool, like his different interpretations of the commandments and
Yeah.
like how to use, and they're like they are, and like I'm more convinced that they are actually a pretty, like from his point of view, like a pretty good moral compass, like to go by, especially with his interpretations, like yeah.
Yeah, the thou shalt not kill being continuity.
And honor thy father and thy mother, like honor tradition, like, and maybe some formality there, like what you're
Yeah.
given.
Well, the
And
adultery of like the carnal adultery, psychic adultery, and the spiritual adultery. I really like that because I think that people are super lax with their morals these days, and like the way of holding like people like accountable or whatever, or just like thinking deeper into like the moral implications of actions. Like, oh, it was just a mistake, and I'm like, was it though? Like
yeah,
the fourth mistake you've made exactly like that.
yeah.
It doesn't seem like a mistake. So I just really liked that there were like different levels to that too, because I think growing up we've all heard the commandments and they seem pretty like cut and dry, like two-dimensional. But I think he like added a little bit more depth for me, which I really like.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to have a society like that.
Have you guys ever read The Island by Aldous Huxley?
I
Yeah,
don't know if I've read it.
I haven't heard of that one.
You
I think Cody, you'd really like it, especially. It's basically like the rest of the world has bled themselves dry on oil and killed themselves off with war and disease. And there's this one island that's maintained neutrality, and it's quote unquote New Zealand, like
Ooh,
what would be modern day New Zealand.
I've
And
been
they've like
there.
shut out they shut out the rest of the world, and they have created a society that teaches off of Eastern philosophy, not religion, but philosophy. So they have like this way of teaching kids that is like very open. It's like open play. Like they teach them these like things through experience. And like there's this kid and he's prone to having anger. So they give him a sledgehammer or like an axe and go tell him to like chop wood. You know, like
Yeah,
there's like moral building exercises. No, there's no punishment,
yeah.
you know. And it was just like really, really cool, and like the Eastern philosophy and like their like view on the commandments. They're not like commandments, but there's like these are like positive ways of being and these are negative ways of being, and it wasn't like that black and white. I don't know. It's a really good book. You'd like it. But the hierarchy
Cool.
of the society that they build in that story is really good.
Nice. Alrighty, I'm gonna stop the recording.